Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Hello. My name is Keith Lewis, and I'm an alcoholic. Just grateful to be here. The little town I'm from is called Fayetteville. And if I were really from Fayetteville, I'd say Fayetteville. But I'm a transplant. It's really nice to be here. I got sober in Washington, D.C. On May the 13th, 1973. For that, I'm very grateful. And when I came in, they didn't say hi. You know, they just say who you were, and nobody said anything. And I was sober about 6 months, and I ended up going to France. I was sent over there to study. It was one of my first great sober blessings. And it was a woman from Utah or someplace at this meeting in Paris. And she's sitting next to me, and she was hard of hearing. And they had asked me to lead a meeting. They grab anybody who came into town and didn't smell like alcohol and ask them to lead a meeting. And so they asked me to lead a meeting, and I was sitting there, and I introduced myself, and this woman screamed, "Hi, Keith," in my ear, and I dropped the coffee in my lap. And so every time I hear that, I get a real warm feeling. We now do it in North Carolina and surrounding areas. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. I want to thank Richard for asking me, and I've really enjoyed our conversations on the phone. I want to thank Michelle, who was a friend of mine now for a little while. Michelle and I met in Oklahoma at a singles conference last year, and she was kind enough to pick me up at the airport and to show me around and things. And I'd like to thank Bob, who took me off the golf course so I could be humiliated today. And I want to thank Ed, who won the long driving contest. He also won the golf thing, and not only that, he's really into service because he also kept score. So he did all those things for us, and he just into service, I suppose. You know, I had my first drink when I was 5 years old. I'm the second child in a family of 10 children, and I'm Irish. And I won't tell you what church I went to. You're going to have to guess. But I had my I was I guess 5 when I had my first drink. My brother Denny was 4. I have to tell you about Denny. He's an interesting character. Denny was 4 years old, and my mother was out one night. I don't know if she was at bingo or doing something, and having a baby, or I don't know. She was away, and my father, I guess he thought it'd be kind of funny. We rarely had alcohol around the house because both of my parents had alcoholic parents, and so they were going to keep us from getting into trouble by hiding it. And but we had a couple of beers in the refrigerator. My father got them out, and I never forget this. This was an interesting day. We were sitting around the kitchen table, and some of you may not remember, but the little jelly glasses used to have cartoon characters on them, and so he got us 2 little jelly glasses, and he gave us each a beer, and he took a beer, and my jelly glass had Superman on it. I don't know if that's significant or not, but there's a psychologist in the crowd. He might get off on it, and we kind of drank our beer, and nothing happened to me. I mean, I thought it tasted a little strange, but nothing happened to me. And I looked across the table with Denny, and Denny's sliding down out of the chair under the table, and he began to roll around under the table, and he was singing "Mary Had a Little Lamb" and other drinking songs, and my father got a little excited, and he said, "Come on, it's time to go to bed." And he told us to put on our pajamas, and I put mine on, and Denny wasn't hearing it, so he had to wrestle Denny down, and he had to put his pajamas on him. It's the kind with the feet and the trap door and everything. And so I went upstairs to go to bed, and he carried Denny up, and Denny was singing and carrying on and laughing, and put him in his bed, and he was a little concerned because I guess my mother was due home soon, and she would have killed him. So he asked us not to tell her. And he said, "If you don't tell your mother, I'll take you to the movies." And he began to try to buy us off. And And I was always a nice kid, easy to get along with. But Denny wasn't here. He was carrying on and laughing and everything. And finally, Denny stood up in bed, and he urinated on the floor. And I remember laying over in my bed watching this thing. It was disgusting. And I remember thinking, as I was watching this go on, I remember thinking, you know, now, there's a kid who's powerless over alcohol and whose life has become unmanageable. And it's the saddest thing. He grew up and became a social drinker. It's awful, you know. He had the world in the palm of his hand, and he just let it slip through. You know, had such a good beginning. And you know, he grew up, he did strange things. You won't understand this. I don't understand it, but I don't like to talk about it, but I will. He grew up and he went to one college. You know? And graduated on time. Went to one graduate school. Had one major. Graduated on time. Looked around at different jobs, picked one. He's now a vice president in this large international corporation, worked his way up the ladder. And the most disgusting thing of all, he's married to one woman. And, you know, you figure, here's a kid who had it made, and he just blew it. Just let it go. And I wasn't like it. You know, he wasn't cut out for it. He just wasn't put together to be an alcoholic or a drug addict. He wasn't made right, you know. He used to, like, go to bed and go to sleep. You know, from the time he was a little kid, he'd go to bed and he'd go to sleep. And, you know, and he didn't understand what was going on because we were in the same room, and I'd go to bed, and I heard it down there, that thing under the bed. I heard it. And I'd press my ear against the mattress, and I'd hear it moving around down there. And it was only there when the lights were out. And what it did was it waited there, and if a little kid swung his legs over the bed, it snatched him under the bed. And you never came back. If it got you, you never came back. And the reason I know that's true is because I never met a kid who came back. Never met one. So I know that's true. And so I'd lay there at night concentrating on being skinny because it could reach up on both sides of the bed. Because if you don't believe it, tomorrow morning look at your sheets. There are going to be marks right up to where you are. And so I don't think about it tonight, but tomorrow morning just kind of wake up and look at it, you know. So you know, while other people in the family were going to bed and going to sleep, I was laying there just sort of practicing terror. And I also knew that you had to keep it secret. You couldn't tell anybody about it. And the thing in the daytime used to stay in a closet. So I used to get my clothes out in the dark, and you know, because it was in there in the daytime, and so nothing ever matched. And I remember I'd go to bed at night, and boy, once I was in bed, that's where I stayed. And you know, if you're a frightened little kid, you got to deal with problems other people don't have to deal with. Like I was 5 years old, and one night I had too much Kool-Aid, and I had to make a big decision. You know, I had to either wet the bed, or I had to take a chance on that thing getting me, and I'd never come back. Now, I knew that if I wet the bed, my parents were really going to be upset. But I knew if I never came back, they'd really be upset. So I wet the bed. Seemed like a loving thing to do. And I know now, I didn't realize it then, but I know now that I just didn't hear things like other people did. I was a sick little kid. I had a speech impediment. I couldn't talk, so I didn't. I tried not to be noticed. I had a teacher when I was before I went to grade school who found out about my speech impediment, and she was kind of interested in those things, so she spent a lot of hours with me teaching me to do things and to talk but I was always very self-conscious. I couldn't say most words. I couldn't be understood. Even my family couldn't understand most of what I said. I've had a lot of illnesses, bronchitis and things like that, so I didn't get to do a lot of things as a real little kid. I didn't learn to swim until I was like 9 or 10 years old and things like that. So I always felt inadequate and always felt kind of left behind. And I just carried that with me. So, of course, when I was 17 years old and I graduated from high school, the only thing for me to do was to run over and join the Marine Corps. So I did. I was 5 feet 1 inches tall and I weighed 113 pounds, and I ran over and joined the Marine Corps. And seemed to make sense. I don't know how, but it did. And I went off to Pittsburgh, which was about 60 miles from where I lived, which is about as far as I'd ever been from home. And I was this frightened little kid who had things living under his bed and had all these secrets, and particularly had all these feelings of inadequacy. I kind of thought, I don't know if anybody else ever felt like this, but I kind of thought that everybody knew what was going on. It was kind of like God got everybody together in a room like this, and he said, look, I'm going to run through this one time. And he explained about what it was like to be a real man and what it was like to be a real woman, and he'd tell men how to get along with women and women how to get along with men and how to grow up, and he just filled everybody in, and I was in a bathroom. And so my job was to kind of act like I knew too. And I spent my whole life trying to get cues from you so I'd know how to act. I don't know if anybody ever felt like that, but that's the way I felt. I always thought I had to be last. You know, I was a reasonably good student, but I always knew that the next year or the next semester or the next term, I wasn't going to do well. I just always kind of knew that. When I was in high school, I dated, but I always questioned the judgment of the people who dated me. And I always thought that they were like resting between real men. And I always kind of felt that way. I loved it. When I lived in Washington, my sponsor's name was Sandy. And Sandy used to say to me, he'd say, I know that feeling. He said, it's like you're standing on a corner in a strange town, and somebody would come up and say, excuse me, you're standing in my spot. And I'd move. And that's really how I kind of felt. I always felt like I was sitting in somebody else's chair, and any minute they were going to come back and ask me to move. And I was ready. I was ready to move. And the problem with feeling that way is after a while I got tired of it. So I became obnoxious, and I began to be angry with everybody. I began to be angry with everything. I began to be angry with every conceivable institution because I knew that I didn't belong there. And I knew that they had the power to pull the plug on me anytime they wanted to. I remember how angry I was with my wife because it was like I'd borrowed her. And somewhere along the line, a real person's going to come along and tell me I had to go. And so what I did was I was angry with her. And I punished her. I did that with a lot of people, particularly people who were very important to me and people I really, really loved. I never let them off the hook. I always made them pay. I didn't want to do that, but that's the way I was. Here I am. I'm off to join the Marine Corps, and they took me. And so I immediately thought the Marine Corps was probably not the right place to be, but it was too late at that time. And I was with 3 other guys, and they were all from that area. I didn't know them, and they were all from that area. And they said, "We're going to go over to a bar. Would you like to come?" And I didn't particularly want to go, but I was afraid I'd get lost if I didn't, so I went. And we went in and sat down, and that panic that was always there was there. And this man came over, and this was a bar. I don't know if you've ever been in a bar in Pittsburgh, but the place was filled with real men. I mean, real men, you know. I mean, they had tattoos. They spit on the floor. They knew words I never even heard, and they probably did the things they were saying. I mean, you know, real men, and all of them had a real woman with them, and those are women that hang around with real men, and guys like me get what's left, you know, and And so I was sitting there trying to be anonymous, and the bartender came up and said, "What do you want?" And I looked for what they were going to say, and they said a beer, so I said a beer. So we all had a beer, and then he came up and we had another, and then we had another. And something happened to me. I can't explain it, but I don't have to explain it to you because you know. I stood up. I was 6 feet 4 inches tall. You know? And I looked out, and my right shoulder was out to here, and my left shoulder was out to here, and the muscles were rippling through my body and pulling at the buttons on my shirt, you know, and it was like a bolt of lightning came through me, and all the terror and all the fear and everything was gone. And I remember saying, "Aha, aha." And the guy said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I understand. I finally understand the big picture. I knew what I thought you had known all along." And I stumbled, and the guy said, "What happened?" I said, "I think I just tripped over an invisible line." Because I sincerely believe that that's the moment that I entered this new world. I really believe that. And I looked around, and my heart broke. This place was filled with pathetic little men. And, you know, and they all had women with them, or looking at me with hungry eyes and saying, "God, I could have a man like that. I'd give this turkey up in a minute. I'd do anything to have a guy like that." And you know, they looked so confused and lost, you know, and I started going from table to table and explaining things to them about life, about sex, about the Marine Corps, about the world, about politics. And I felt a great urgency because I knew my time there was limited, and they would only have me for a few more hours. And so I endeavored to get to all the places, and the time came and I had to leave, and I left, and you know, they were held back, but I knew that they wanted to burst into tears and everything, and so we went and got on a train, and I immediately threw up and had a blackout, and woke up the next day in Washington, D.C., which was 3 times as far from home as I'd ever been, and I was little, and I was frightened, and I was unsure of myself again, and I was standing in the middle of Union Station, and the guy said to me, "We're going to go have a drink. You want to come with us?" And I said, "Yeah, what do I know? I'm from out of town." So I went, and same thing happens. And, you know, I'm not a quick study, but a couple of times I realized the problem was I was sober. Been my whole problem. I was sober. I was not born to be sober. When I was sober, it was abnormal, and the world was abnormal, and you were hostile, and you were smart, and you didn't have time for me. You didn't like me. So my only defense was to hate you. And I went on, and I really did like the Marine Corps. I really did. I did very well. I gained a lot of weight and got some muscle and ran around the world and did all sorts of things. But mainly what I did was I progressed in my illness. That's mainly what I did. And, you know, I liked it so much that I was going to stay. I was this little kid from a town, and I wanted to work and get a commission and get on to college and everything. And I got out. I got out after 4 years because, and I had gotten all these good promotions and I'd done well. But I realized that it was an abnormal way to live, and it made me drink funny. So I got out, and I went to work in a steel mill, and that was an abnormal way to live, and it made me drink funny. And I moved to Baltimore. Used to be an Oriole fan. But that was an abnormal way to live, and it made me drink funny. And so I moved to Washington, D.C., and that's really an abnormal way to live. It made me drink funny. And I realized suddenly that my problem wasn't where I lived. My problem was the fact I was single. So I got married. You talk about an abnormal way to live, and it really made me drink funny. I look back on that. That was an interesting thing. Well, we were two sickos looking for each other. I'm not kidding you. I mean, neither of us had seen a ball since the kickoff, and we ran into one another, And it was love at first sight. I'm not kidding you, And we got together, and it was the first person I ever knew who agreed with me about them. And I thought, God, you talk about kindred souls. And we sit around and talk about them. They didn't want her to finish nursing school because they thought she was emotionally imbalanced. Now, it didn't surprise me because they had said stuff like that about me, too. They'd say, he's not all here even when he's here, and things like that about me. So I wasn't surprised that they felt the same way about her. So we got together and compared notes, and I'm telling you, you talk about a refuge from the storm. And so we looked around, and we never met anybody exactly like us. So we got married, and we had a couple children. Kelly was the first daughter. She's a student at Duquesne University now. It's kind of interesting. She didn't drink until she went to college, and she called me up and said, Dad, I've decided I'm going to use alcohol now that I'm in college. And I didn't tell her, but Duquesne's in Pittsburgh. It's just sort of funny, isn't it? Yeah. And then Kimberly was born. I have to tell you a little bit about Kimberly. Kimberly is one of the great gifts. Kelly is just an incredible kid. We've always been real close. And Kimberly is one of the great gifts in my life. Kimberly was, by this time, things were really sick. I'm not kidding you. I mean, I'm unfaithful, abusive, just crazy, absolutely crazy. I just losing my mind. I was eating amphetamines, and so I could drink more, so I could do all this obsessive stuff, so I could go to school and work, and just all the nonsense that goes on. And I so appreciated Sandy's talk last night, because boy, that was really my mindset, that I had to somehow make the world livable, and the only way I could do that was to get enough into me. That's it. And then the world could become livable. I remember I'd get up in the morning with madness, the absolute madness. It'd be this panic. And I'd be driving around the Beltway in Washington, D.C., almost daily, toying with the idea of turning the wheel a little bit. And then they could collect the insurance. And then I'd go into the hospital, and I directed genetics laboratories. And I'd go into the hospital, and we'd have all these projects and research things going on, and graduate students and patients and people running all over the place. And I'd be mad all day. I mean, I'd just be mad. And then I'd leave, and I'd stop by Chadwick's or Clyde's or someplace, and I'd sit down, and I remember one time I went to see an autopsy on a guy who drank himself to death. Because I knew I was drinking a lot, and I figured that if I'd see something like this, I might not drink as much. And I watched him, and he took out this guy's liver. It looked like a lump of coal, and the thing bounced it across the stainless steel table. And I left there, and I went to Chadwick's, and I said to Vinny, the bartender, I said, you better give me a double. You'll never guess what I saw. And he said, well, you always get a double. I said, well, you better make it a triple then, because you'll never guess what I saw. And I explained this thing to him. And all the guys who were there every day I was there said, my God, how can somebody do that to themselves? People have no respect, no love for themselves. What's wrong with people like that? I said, I don't know. I guess they're just weak. And I'd finish that triple, and I'd sit back and I'd sigh. And it was like for the first time I woke up that day. And people would say to me, why do you drink? Huh. Because I'm not insane. That's why. That's why. Because that's the only thing that makes everything else seem right, or seem normal, or seem of value. It's the basic turning point of every day. That's why. There's no other reason to. If you don't understand that, you don't understand anything. I was flying back from France, and I was sober about 6 months, and I went over and studied for a couple of months, and I went and spent some time in Rome, and I was flying back, and we're on this this airline, and there's a graduate student there. You know, graduate students are always making observations. And he'd sit there and he'd go, that means he just made an observation. And I said, you know, what's the matter, Matt? He said, this is curious. That means it's a brilliant observation. And I said, how is that? And he said, everybody on his plane but you and that woman had 1 or 2 drinks. You didn't have any, and she's had 12, and she's ordering them 3 at a time. Why is that? And I said, well, everybody on this plane but me and that woman is sick. I said, I've had all I can have, and she got about 6 months left. And I said, all the rest of you are leading marginal existences. You know? And he said, He never asked me another question all the way across the Atlantic. Anyway, Kimberly was born, and she was born about 2.5 months premature, and I was that particular night. You know, everybody needs a night off. That particular night, I was laying on the living room floor watching the test pattern on TV, and some guys golf, some guys play tennis. I watched the test pattern, and I was watching in my underwear because watching a test pattern is kind of a private thing, and you want to be comfortable. And someone had wet the floor I was lying on, and I woke up, and there are 2 neighbors standing there watching me watch the test pattern in my underwear, and my wife running around screaming things like, the baby's coming, and I jumped up, and it was immediate. My thought was immediate. I didn't know who to blame. I didn't know whether to blame Kimberly for coming early or her mother for letting her. But I knew that if the kid had been born on time, I'd be all right. I knew that. And I got to tell you that if Kimberly had waited till I was all right to be born, her mother would have carried her for 2.5 years. But I somehow got dressed, and I got her in a car, and I ran her to the hospital I worked in, and I was drunk and stoned, and I took her in, and I began to demand that they give her good care. And, you know, only a drunk would do that. I mean, I was so nasty. This woman was unbelievable. I mean, an absolute animal, and I demand that they give her good care. And Kimberly was born, and she has hypomembrane disease, and I had long since stopped believing in God by this time, because if there was a God, he had a weird sense of humor, and he liked to punish people, and so I had just sort of given up on him. I used to say I was an atheist, that I didn't have the energy to be an atheist. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to be an atheist. And I didn't have the energy or the faith to be an atheist. I just stopped giving a shit, you know? I just stopped caring. I guess that's an agnostic, or it's a guy with brain damage. I don't know what it is, but I just didn't enter into those conversations anymore, even to myself. And but the day before Kimberly was born, they put together an experimental machine in this hospital. It was the only one on the East Coast. The only other one was here in L.A. And so the day she was born, it was there, and they put her on it. And she was the first child with that much impairment to live. And they said to me, they said, you know, even if she lives, she'll be so oxygen starved that she'll be limited. That she'll probably be retarded. And we need your permission to do this. And I gave it because her mother was walking around like a zombie. And my office was across from the neonatal nursery, and I didn't drink or take anything else. This is one of the few times since I began that I was completely alcohol and drug free, and I was that way for about a week. And I used to sit in my office at night with the door cracked and the lights off, and I could watch the nursery, and I could watch my wife watching our baby die.
and I couldn't go to her. And I realized that what I had turned into was something akin to an animal, because there was just nothing left anymore. And they used to say, we like fathers to come in and hold the babies, but you won't have a problem with that because you're in with these kids all the time and you do a lot of testing on them and everything. And I was terrified of that little girl. She weighed about 2.5 pounds, and I was absolutely terrified of her. I knew I'd love her, and I knew I'd lose her, because I knew a guy like me didn't deserve somebody like that. And I remember the night that my wife went in and baptized that child. At around 72 hours is a very critical time for these kids, and they didn't think she was going to make it, and she went in and baptized her. And God, I wanted to run in there, and I wanted to grab them both, and I wanted to say, let's us do this. But I was so spiritually ill, I was utterly incapable of being an us. I was completely and utterly incapable of even acting like an us. There were times before when I'd be lying in bed next to this woman, and I'd feel completely separate from her. I'd be holding these little children, and I'd feel like they weren't mine. But this time, I knew I couldn't even act like a father. I couldn't even act like a husband. Couldn't even act like a human being. And I'd like to report that little angel is now 18 years old and will be running up to Washington, D.C. Next month to watch her graduate from high school. And she's going off to Auburn University. I couldn't get either of my kids to go to Georgetown University, but she's going off to Auburn, and she's absolutely gorgeous, and she's a brilliant young student, and just a beautiful girl. And there's something special about her. I never knew what it was, and a friend of mine told me. He nearly lost a son at birth, and he said, when little kids almost die, they see the angels. And I think that's true, because there's something different and special about this kid. There's a purity about her and a beauty about her that isn't earthly. And I just love being around her. I learned so much from her. She's such a neat kid. And I just like I say, love being around her. I saw her about a year, and she's riding in the back seat one day, and the guy in the program was sitting next to me, and it was in D.C., and I was going through Rock Creek Park, and it was during the Cherry Blossom Festival, and all these weirdos from out of town come in and look at the flowers and get in my way, and I get behind one, and they're from Indiana doing 20 miles an hour. I get behind the other, and they're from Ohio doing 20 miles an hour. And back and forth, and honking my horn. And finally I said to my friend in the car, I said, why didn't that woman move over? And this little voice from the back seat says, Daddy, she probably doesn't know who you are. So next month at about this time, I will be up in Washington, D.C. at DAR, Constitution Hall, with my other daughter, Kelly, my ex-wife, and my husband-in-law, watching this kid graduate from high school. And what a great blessing. I used to stop drinking. We used to go on these starting over routines. I don't know if anybody's here good at starting over, but we have starting over down to a science. And the way we start over is we take the kids and leave them at somebody's parents' house, and then we'd come back, and our sex life isn't what it could have been. It was non-existent, is what it was, and I was convinced it was her fault. And so what I'd do is I'd talk to her about it, and she'd go out and buy these things that did funny things to me, negligees and things, and I'd make up my mind I was going to come home and be good, and that's how we'd start over. So the first night I'd come home, and we might have a drink or something, and we'd go to the theater, we'd do something she liked to do, and come home, and she'd put one of these things on that did strange things to me, and we have a great night, and I get up the next morning, and she served me coffee in bed the way it always should have been, and I go off to work, and we did this for 3 or 4 days, and then, I was thinking about the guys at the bar. I mean, they were interested in our marriage. They said we had the best marriage of the whole bunch, and so I wanted to stop by and report to them how it was going. So I stopped by the bar, and one thing leads to another, and before I knew it, it was 10 o'clock. Well, you don't go home at 10 o'clock. That's when they're in the peak of their anger. They peak out between 10 and 11, and then they start down the downside, So you get there about 2, they're almost normal. And so I figured I'd wait. So 2 o'clock the bar closed, and I went home. And she had what I used to call an olive plate. It was food that was about 6 months old. She used to keep it in the freezer. And she'd throw away the good dinner, and she'd put the olive plate out there for me. And it was dried up, and it turned colors and things. And I'd take it, and I'd smash it against the wall. And didn't break it. It broke the plate, but she just pick it up and put it on another plate, put it back in the freezer for the next time. And, on the way home, I was thinking, you're kind of hard on her. That poor girl's so crazy about you that she went out and bought those negligees and things, and you really kind of owe it to her to show her some attention. So I went in to see her, and it's different this time. This time, she didn't have a negligee on. She had this thing on that starts up here, and it goes to the floor, and it out to each wrist, and it is dark brown, and thick like a curtain, and looked like a buffalo robe, and what it meant was not tonight, and I started to demand my rights, my marital rights, and she used to take some pills because I made her nervous. And when she took these pills, it was funny because one eye would look one way, and one eye would look the other way. And I never knew for sure who she was talking to. And being basically a peace-loving guy, I didn't want to hit her, so I began to tear the house up. I'd throw things around, and I was carrying on everything, and she grabbed her matching buffalo robe house coat and her purse and ran out of the house. Now, I knew what was going to happen, and we'd been through this drill before. She was going to call her psychiatrist, the one she was having the affair with. He didn't like me because he wanted me out of the picture, so he'd tell her to call the police. And I knew the deal, so I wasn't born yesterday, so I ran around and I straightened everything up. I vacuumed, I cleaned up, I straightened everything up. I went in, I took off my clothes, pajamas I used to wear when the police came. I put on my pajamas, and I messed my hair up, and I brushed my teeth and everything, and the doorbell rang. And I put on my robe, and I went out to the door, and I looked out through the peephole, and it was my wife in her buffalo robe and 2 county policemen. And I gathered myself as only we can do, and I jerked the door open, and I said, "Thank God you found her." And third policeman, one was a young guy about 21 or so, and the other was an old guy about 30. And I said, he said, "Could we come in?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm beside myself with worry." And so they came in, and the place looked great. It looked better than when I got home. And so we looked at one another, and she had that, "Oh no, I've been had again. I don't know, I'm looking." She burst into tears, and she ran into the bedroom. I said to her, "Did you call the doctor?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, thank God if you run out here in the middle of the night, at least you call the doctor." And she started to cry, and she ran into the bedroom, and I remember the older policeman sort of looked at the floor and shook his head, and he reached over and hit me on the arm, and he said, "You hang in there, son." And I said, "Yes, sir." And they left. And that isn't the sick part, I mean, that'll do till something real bad comes along, but the sick part was I went out and I made myself a drink, and I got her a glass of wine, got her one of those pills that made her eyes do funny things, And I took it in, she was sitting on the side of the bed, and she was crying. And these big tears. And I think the deeper a person's hurt, the bigger the tears. And she looked up at me and she said, "Can you forgive me for embarrassing you like that?" And I said to her, I said, "Honey, you can't help it. You're just, you're having a bad time. Things just aren't right for you." And she had her wine, and I had my scotch, and she took her pill, and she took off the buffalo robe and put on a negligee, and we went to bed. And we were convinced that we were the luckiest couple in the world. We were convinced that anybody in the neighborhood would give anything to have what we had. People in the neighborhood would have committed suicide if they had what we had. You can't make it like that for long. And I remember her words one day. She said, "Would you please leave? I'm afraid of what's going to happen if you don't." And I agreed with her, and I left. And I was then to spend the next 6 months coming as close to dying as I think a human being can. I went absolutely mad. I so related to your talk last night. I just went mad. There's no other way to describe it. I was living in a dive in Washington, D.C., and I'd never been one to drink around the clock or to take anything during the day or anything, and I just began to take it. And I'd get to work sometimes. I'd go in on Saturdays. We did a lot of research projects. So I'd get in there during the middle of the night and things like that, and I'd do enough to make my presence known and to try to hold on to my job, and everything began to go. It was absolutely unbelievable. And the day came when I just couldn't do it anymore. I started drinking in bootleg joints on 14th Street in Washington, D.C., and I had a big mouth. And I remember there's this one guy, he's about as big as a house, big black guy, and I was making some sort of racial remarks or something. I don't remember the context of it. But anyway, he picked me up and he shoved a 45 in my mouth. And if I think about it, I can taste that oil now. And he said, "You honk," he said, "I'd kill you, but I don't want to do you no favors." And he threw me out of this bootleg joint. Now, I don't know if you know what it's like to get thrown out of a bootleg joint, but they're downstairs. They're always in the basement. And they throw you out, and it doesn't happen all at once. If you're upstairs, it happens all at once. Gravity takes over, you roll to the sidewalk, and, if the steps are real high, you may roll clear out in the street, but there's an end to it. When they throw you out of a bootleg joint, they just throw you one step at a time, and you smack into it, and they pick you up, and they throw you again, and they pick you up and throw you again, and finally they toss me across the sidewalk, and I went home making up my mind I'd never go back there. They'd never have my business again. And then I drank in the zoo. I don't know if anybody ever did that, but I hope you don't. But if you drink, I'd like to recommend the zoo. It's a nice place, civilized place. A lot going on. I used to go to the Ape House. There are a lot of different places, but my preference was the Ape House. You kind of get on the bleachers in there, and I used to fill up this Tupperware glass. I think it's about 26 ounces or something. I'd fill it up with scotch, and I used to put an ice cube in it so I wouldn't be an alcoholic. And then I'd burp it, because that's what you're supposed to do with Tupperware. And I'd take it to the zoo. It was just down the street, and I'd go in there and I'd sit. And, if you go to a place for a while, you get to know everybody. And directly across from where I sat was a cage with an orangutan in it. And all the great apes are nice, but orangutans are kind of special. They kind of have a lot more personality than a lot of the other apes. And after a while, we sort of had eye contact. And we used to laugh at all the people coming in and out. I remember, we laughed, and this orangutan was so clever, Orangutan would pick up a pile of dung, and just sort of sit there with this grin, and I'd really anticipate this would be great. And some poor slob would turn their head, and the orangutan would let go and hit him. I'm saying, right on. That's what you said back then. Right on, orangutan. Way to go, because that's what I'd always wanted to do with people, And it was wonderful. And I remember somebody asked me one time if it was a male or a female. It's hard to tell with an orangutan. And besides that, by this time I was impotent, so it didn't make a hell of a lot of difference. And one day this ape looked at me in what I perceived to be disgust, and I began to curse the ape, and they threw me out of the zoo. And I kind of consider that the end of my social drinking, because then I went home and just did it at home alone around the clock. You know, the really sick stuff, you know what I mean? I no longer even called it fun. You'd call up an order over the phone, and they'd bring it down there, and you know, you'd give them a check or the money or whatever the hell you could give them, an appliance, anything, and then you just drink, and you know, one day I just knew I couldn't live like this anymore, and I got up and I went into the bathroom, and I was going to die. I had enough pills to kill half of Northwest Washington D.C. I had everything imaginable, and I began to take them, and something happened to me. It was absolutely amazing. I just knew that I wasn't supposed to die, and I knew I was 29 years old, and it's not supposed to be over when you're 29. It's supposed to be beginning. And I had a phone number that my ex-wife had given me. It took me 2 years of sobriety to admit she gave me that number. Nobody else was even talking to me. Nobody else possibly could have given me the number. But it took me 2 years to give her that. And I called that number. And I didn't know what it was to. And it turned out to be a little treatment center. I'm so glad that you talked about treatment and things. You know, I get to a fair number of conventions, and I hear so many speakers put down treatment centers and on and on. I don't understand it, because if it hadn't been for this place, I wouldn't be here. I just wouldn't be here. You know, 30% of the people joining our fellowships now are coming out of treatment centers. I don't want to get off on anything. It saddens me to hear that. I remember how threatened I felt early on, because not many people have been to treatment centers, and they'd say to me, "Oh, you went to treatment? Well, I did it the hard way." I said, "Shit, man. I mean, how much harder did it have to get? I almost died. I mean, how hard does it have to get? What, were you dead and raised? You know, understand it." Can I say one other thing? I'm so glad you all got here so young. Yeah, I finally got to say it. That used to drive me up a wall. People used to say that to me. Drive me up a wall. I say, you know, if I'd have been one day older, I'd been dead. You know. I used to love it. Something like, you know, they talk like I had another 10 or 20 years. If I had another 10 or 20 years, I'd have been out there. You know, I mean, I took the last drink and the last drug I could take and still live. I mean, if I had to cut it in half, I'd have cut it in half. I mean, there's not another one I can take and live. That's it. You know, if my gift was I knew that if I took one more drink or one more drug, I was going to die. I knew that. But more importantly, I knew that knowing that would never keep me from taking it. I knew that. I knew that if it were certain death, I'd do it anyway. So when I got to an AA meeting and they talked about powerlessness and unmanageability, I knew what they were talking about. Because I knew if I took one drink or one drug, I'd die, and knowing that would never keep me from taking it. You know, that's true today. If I take one drink or one drug, I'm going to die. And knowing that never keep me from taking it. The only thing that will keep me from taking it is a direct intervention of you and God. That's what keeps me from taking it. You know, like my last mood-altering chemical was May the 13th, 1973. So a week from now, it'll be 15 years. But that's not the important one. The important one is the one that's out ahead of me. Okay? I have a chemical out ahead of me. And I'm going to take it. I got a disease that guarantees I'll take it. Not I might take it, or if I'm not lucky, I might take it. It guarantees I will take it. Now, that constitutes an emergency. I don't know how you feel about it, but that constitutes an emergency. Now, the only chance I have is a day at a time to push that thing out ahead of me. And the way I do that is by trying to live life based upon spiritual principles, going to a lot of meetings, being sponsored, all the stuff we know about. And a day at a time, I'm privileged to push that out ahead of me. One day, I plan to live to be 101. I'm 100, I'm really going to clean it up. And I'm going to spend one real, a sanctified year. It's going to be unbelievable. I'm going to be all spirit for a year. And I'm going to die, and then about 6 months later, there's going to be a drink or a drug or something. Or somebody will say, "Who's this?" They'll say, "That's Keith, but he died." See, that's my goal. My goal was to keep it out ahead of me till I die. But that's the one that's important to me. That's the one I come back for. I quit smoking cigarettes 12 years ago. I don't feel that way about cigarettes. I hate that. I don't like this. I'm glad I don't smoke. But I hate that they're going to call cigarettes a narcotic and all that. I hate that. They don't understand what we have if they think that cigarettes equate with what we have. They don't understand it. They don't understand how good what we had was. If they understood, the world would be filled with Marlboro men and women. But they can't do with anything what we did, with what we used. They can't do it. So they play around. Okay, so the lady said she'd take me. So I go off to this, 3 days later, I go off to this place. It took me 5 hours to drive 30 miles. The terror. Remember the terror? Oh, the terror. And I could drive about a mile, and I'd begin to shake and sweat. And I had this old alcoholic car, and I pulled off the side of the road. I'd get out, and I'd just walk around. My legs would buckle, and I'd be dizzy and sick at my stomach. I wet my pants. I'm changing my pants beside this old car out on Route 29 outside of Washington, D.C. My Phi Theta Kappa key fell out of my pocket. And I wondered what had happened. Wondered what had happened to this kid who everybody said had all this potential. Wondered what had happened to this kid who they said was a bright, young, rising star. And I wet my pants. And I get out to this place. And back then, at least in that part of the country, they didn't let many drunks in hospitals for things. And so what they did was they put us in condemned places. Like the place I went was an old condemned hotel, and people couldn't stay in it anymore, so they put alcoholics and drug addicts in it. And and it took me so long to get there that they gave my bed away. And I said to this lady, kind lady, who looked me deep in the eyes and touched something inside of me, because she was one of us. I said to her, "Can I keep my car in your parking lot?" And she said, "Yeah, but why would you do that?" And I said, "I'm going to sleep in it, because if I go back to town, I'm going to die." Because I knew that if I took one drink or one drug, I'd die, and I knew that knowing that would never keep me from taking it. And she said, "You can sleep on our sofa." And that night, somebody ran away from treatment, and I pray for that guy a lot, but I got his bed. I did. I got his bed. I got his bed. And that bed works. That bed works. And something happened to me that had never happened before. I went in there, and within a few days, I had all these dreams about get my wife back and get my kids back and everything else. And I was going to get sober and go tell her how well I was doing. And I got this call from her, and by this time, she is as wacko as I am. And she called, and she was all smoked up. And I never forget this. This is a significant day in my life. Because I thought you all were nice. I'd spent a little time with you, then I had to get on with my life. And so she called me up, and I went upstairs. They had a payphone. I'm on the phone, and she said, "I just want to tell you, I just got out of bed with Jack, and he's better than you'll ever be." And she started laughing, and this guy, I heard this man's voice say, "That's sick," and he took the phone from her evidently and hung it up. And I stand there with this dead phone in my hand, and I heard you outside. You're saying, "Come on, we got to get going. We don't want to be late for the meeting. We got to get going." And I realized that I had a choice. I hung up the phone, and I went with you. I've never, ever regretted that. I've come to know and to love and to cherish, and to respect you, and to hold you in such awe that I can't believe it. I never knew what love meant until I met you. I've been loved. God, I've been loved. I'd been loved when I was this little, sick little kid. My father, who never told me he loved me, you know, one of those. My problem is my father never told me he loved me. God, he'd wrap me up in a blanket and he'd carry me down to the city park and we'd sit on the bench together and we'd watch the other kids play. And he'd say things to me like, your day will come, son. Your day will come. God gives everybody what they need. I never heard that again until I came to you. And you made me hear him. He never told me he loved me. Every day that I'd let that man spend time with me, he'd spend time with me. But I was angry with him. I was angry with everybody. I had a rage inside of me that all the sophistication and the education and the culture and everything in the world couldn't hide. And I beat people with it. And I had a mother. I had a mother who never cared for me. God, how far I was from the truth. How far I was from the truth. I had nuns who I was convinced had ruined me. Nuns have gotten credit for more stuff than the Nazis. I'm telling you. I really have, you know. I wanted to do a ninth step with my brother Denny, the one who failed. And I drove up to New Jersey where he's living, and I was going to do a ninth step with him because this guy's awesome, and I love him. And when I was drunk and sick, he was frightening to me because he looks so damn good. You know, I mean, he just looked good. I mean, boom, 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 up the ladder, all the right decisions. You know, God, he put on a sweatsuit and he looked like he had a tuxedo on. You know, one of those people make you sick. And he looked like Eddie back there. And you know, and I went up to tell him that I owed him an amends because of all the horrible things I'd said about him and everything, and how I envied him because he always made the right decisions and all that stuff. And he sat and listened to me for a little while. And finally he said, "This is incredible." And I said, "Well, I said all these bad things about you to the family and everything." And I said, "What I've begun to do is to make the amends by telling them all the good things that are true about you. And every chance I get, I put something good in the pot. Because the way I used to do before was to poison the atmosphere with something bad." And he started laughing. He said, "You owe me an amends, and I owe you an amends too." He said, "I've always admired and respected you." He said, "I've always been afraid." He said, "I was afraid to change my major." He said, "I was afraid to go to a different college." He said, "I've always been afraid." He said, "I was afraid to take another job." He said, "I'd be afraid to get divorced." He said, "I've envied you because you've never been afraid of anything. You just don't give a shit about anything." He said, you know? And I said, "You know, it was really bad." I said, "You know, the nuns, remember the nuns?" He said, "Oh yeah, those sweet women who gave their lives to treat or to teach ingrates like us." I said, No, you got it all wrong. You know, the roller on the knuckles and the. He said, "Oh yeah, I seem to remember something like that." He said, "But what I remember are these people who really cared about me, taught me about God and everything." I said, "We didn't have the same nuns." He said, Yeah, we had the same nuns. Yeah. So I'm convinced that the problem is that the receiver was broken. And I had a spiritual illness that made it impossible for me to see love. What a horrible thing. Isn't that something? That you can be loved and loved and loved and loved and loved, and I couldn't see it. I think more than anything else, that's the spiritual illness of addiction. More than anything else, is inability to see the incredible amount of love that we're showered with. And you know what's amazing to me? I had to go to a stranger, you know, someone I never saw before in my life, someone I never knew, and they had to teach me about how wrong I was about things. What a wonderful thing to discover. We talk a lot about this weekend with different people, but Michelle and I talk a lot about this. But you know, I guess I was in for a little while, and boy, I was negative. You know what I mean? I mean, I wanted to be positive, but I had to be negative because I began to realize that maybe there was a God, and I put all these facts together, and it seemed to me that if God found out I liked something, He took it away. Now, I loved you people, and I loved the meetings, And I knew if he found out, he'd take them away. So I'd act nonchalant. People say, how do you like it? That's all right. I could take it or leave it. It's all right. And you know, and the old timers would go, and one old guy told me, he said, I want you to do something for me, boy. And I said, what's that? He said, I want you to borrow a lipstick from one of the girls in the program. He said, I don't want you doing anything else with the girls in the program. He didn't know what kind of problems were going on with the impotence and everything. He known how safe the girls were. And he said, and I want you to go home and I want you to write on your mirror, Keith, you are wrong. I said, this guy's mad, you know. I said to him, I said, look, I got a poor self-image. You don't seem to understand. My problem is I don't like myself, and I got to learn to like myself. He said, get a tube of lipstick. So I went to the store. I didn't want to owe a woman anything. So I went to the store, and I bought my own tube of lipstick, and I went home, and I wrote on the mirror, Keith, you are wrong. And I knew this was stupid. I threw the lipstick in the trash can, and I went to bed, and, you know, laid there and obsessed for half the night, and I finally fell off. And I woke up the next morning. It was like every other morning. I woke up, and, you know, depression was standing right by my bed. The minute I opened my eyes, it jumped on me. And I started all this good stuff. I said, you know, you're never going to make it today. Today they're going to find out you don't know how to do the job you've been doing for 7 years. And I go out in the kitchen, and, you know, just a regular up morning, you know, and you know, just all this great stuff. You're never going to have a relationship, and who wants you, and what difference does it make? You're impotent anyway, and you know, all this good stuff. And I went in the bathroom. I looked at the mirror, and it said, Keith, you were wrong. And I said, well, thank God. You know, if I'm right, I'm in a lot of trouble. You know? And I began to understand that I can't make myself have a good self-image. I'm spiritually ill. I can't be trusted as far as I'm concerned. You have to tell me everything that I have. You've reflected back to me. I can't generate these things. My goodness. You know, if I get off alone for any period of time at all, you think I'm generating healthy stuff? Oh, you kidding me? That's why I got to check everything out with you. And fortunately, you change it enough to make it yours and not mine. And once it's yours, and you give it to me, then I'm all right. I don't understand. I just know that it's true. Because my spiritual illness destroys things for me. I can do good things for you, but it destroys things for me. What an awful thing to have happen to a nice guy like me. You know, I was thinking about the early days, and God, it was wonderful. The people were so good with me. I couldn't sleep, right? So I used to drive around D.C. at night. It's a great city at night. Not every night, but at night. And I'd drive around, and the only place, one night I drove over to the Jefferson Memorial, and I knew all the monuments. They were all memorized. And I drove over, and I looked around for a little while, and I laid down in the grass by the tidal basin. I fell asleep. And I couldn't believe it. I woke up about a half hour later, and I ran up, got a sleeping bag. I came back down, I laid down, fell asleep. And went right to sleep. And I guess it must have been an hour later, but somebody's kicking my foot. And I looked, and it was a park policeman. He said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'll tell you. And I told him my story. And I said, I've been sober about 54 days now, and this is the only place in the world I can sleep. So I tried and this is the only place I can sleep. And he said, well, okay, so I'll tell you what. He said, you need to sleep. Come down here and sleep for a little while. That's all right. And he said, I'll tell the other guys, and I'll tell them not to bother you. He said, we'll keep an eye on you, don't worry. And so I'd go down every 3 or 4 nights, when I was going crazy. You know, people always tell you, the old-timers, I love old-timers, right? Nobody ever died from not sleeping, you know. I used to say, no, but people die from sin. Nobody ever died from not sleeping. And so it'd get real bad, and I'd go down there, and I'd lay out the sleeping bag, and I'd lay down there, and I'd be laying there looking at the stars, you know, and I'd hear, Keith, yeah? That's you? Yeah. How many days? 73 days. Way to go. You want a cup of coffee? No, I think I'll get some sleep. Want us to wake you up? No, I'll wake up when the sun comes up. I was wrong about the policemen. I was wrong. They were all right. They weren't all right when I had a chip on my shoulder. They were all right when I didn't. And I began to understand that what the 8th step says is true. All my life, people have reacted to me. They've reacted to the illness in me. Nobody got up and said, let's see how we can screw over Keith today. That's what I thought they were doing. They were just going about their own business. And then I emerged on them. You know? And they goes, oh, and they react to me because I was a schmuck. I was seriously ill. That's why. You know, I always think of an old fella down at the Cosmopolitan Club. I used to think that for every, I don't know if you ever had this thought, but probably did. It was rampant on the East Coast. That every time you had a problem, there was only one answer. Ever think about that? There was a problem, and for each problem there was one answer. If you didn't find the answer to that problem, you had to drink or drug. Big hand would come down, and you'd dump it down your throat or stick it in your nose or do something with it. You know? And you had to find the answer to each problem. And there was a few old-timers around. I didn't tell other people about them because these guys had all the answers. And so I have a problem, I run to them and I ask them the answer. And one day this guy said to me, he said, I don't know the answer to that. And I said, God, I need to know the answer to this. I was thinking I had about 2.5 hours to live. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, but there's a fellow at the Metropolis Club that you can go ask about it. So I go downtown to find this guy. It took me an hour to get down there, and he's out on a 12-step call. And I said, I really need to find this guy. I said, this is really urgent. And they said, well, he'll be back in time for the meeting. So he came in, he dragged somebody new drunk with him. And I said, I got to talk to you right away. And he said, well, we'll talk after the meeting. I said, I may not be alive after the meeting. He said, you'll be all right, you'll be all right. So after the meeting was over, I told him this problem. I couldn't remember it. I belonged to a Problem of the Month club, and this was a big problem. I told him this problem, and I said, I was told you knew the answer. And he said, a neat old guy, he's a black guy. I'll never forget him as long as I live. He's sober a long, long time. Shook his head, and he said, Sonny, he said, I'm sorry. He said, I just don't know the answer to that. And I said, you're my last hope. And I look at the clock, I got 15 minutes. And he said, I'll tell you what, though. He said, I got a suggestion. I said, what's that? I said, I'll do anything. He said, don't drink, even if your ass falls off. I remember driving home thinking, that's the most profound thing I ever heard in my life. And, you know, and that's the day I discovered that this isn't about finding answers. This is about solutions. And if I don't drink, if I don't drug, if I go to meetings, if I work with my sponsor, if I do the best I can with those steps on a daily basis, I will find the solution for living. And that, for me, is recovery. This isn't about answers. I can't remember an answer I got yesterday. But what I know is that I got a solution to live another day. What a marvelous way to live. You know, I was sober about 7 years, and I ended up leaving Washington, D.C. area, and I moved to where I am now in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I spent about 18 months in Birmingham, Alabama, but I moved back to Fayetteville, and I got to tell you that that's my home. And I don't know if you know what it means to have a home. That's my home. That's where I belong. And I love coming. I've never been to L.A. before, this area before. I can't tell you. I've been like a kid in a candy store. I've been on and on for 2 days. I love it. It's beautiful here. And I know this is your home. And this will maybe be my home one day if God wanted it to be. But right now I got a home. And it's wonderful. And you know what else I have in my life? I have a human being in my life. You know, I'm engaged to a beautiful, wonderful human being, and her name is Julie. And you know, all my life I dreamt of being faithful in a relationship. I couldn't be faithful in any relationship. If we were friends, I'd start looking for somebody else because I knew you were going to do me in and I'd need a friend. And you know, if I were romantically involved with somebody, I'd need to be looking around for somebody else because I knew that this wouldn't last. And so what I kept thinking was, what I need to do is find the right woman. Then I'll be faithful. I'll find the right friend, and then I'll be faithful. And what I did was, I made you responsible for my faithfulness. And what I really realized was, there's not a human being in the world that can do that for me. People say to me, you know, you travel a lot, you meet a lot of wonderful and beautiful people, and on and on. Do you think about Julie? Is that how you remain faithful to your relationship? I said, no. Well, I think about God. And frequently God will remind me of her. I wish you could know her. Maybe one day you will. She's precious. And she's beautiful and she's wonderful. And I love her. And she loves me. I can't tell you what that's like for me. It's an absolute miracle. I don't want to possess her, and she doesn't want to possess me. I just want to be with her. You know, when I'm not supposed to be with her, I'm not supposed to be with her, and that's okay too. And I heard you talk last night, and I know that's what you have. And I watched you people. You've taught me everything I've ever known. And I've watched you, and you've taught me all about living. You've taught me all about life. You've taught me all about love. You taught me to turn to God, to be faithful in a relationship. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that I don't drink and that I don't drug. It's a miracle that I'm faithful in a relationship. Because I wasn't capable of that for many years sober. Many years. So what I did was I jumped from person to person and person to person and person to person. Because I kept thinking that it was the wrong person. I was the wrong person. What a precious thing to have. And it's all from you. Everything is from you. I love you so much. I could never say. My heart screams it. When I leave, I'll think about you. I'll pray for you. I love you, I love you, I love you. And that's your gift to me. That's your unique, special gift to me. I have a God who loves me. And when I moved down to Fayetteville, I'd had a wonderful spiritual awakening. Not a spiritual experience. Spiritual experiences come and go. I had been changed. I'd been transformed. What had happened to me was a thing that Bill Wilson talked about. I'd had a spiritual awakening that resulted in a personality change. I was not the same Keith Lewis who ever was before. And it happened as a direct result of the steps. And I moved down to Fayetteville, and I was sitting in this little balcony overlooking this little lake, in a place that was my home, in a place in which I belonged. And I was watching the ducks, and I was praying, and I was reading the big book, and I was reading the big, big book. And I found a search for spiritual things. And I looked out there, and I began to cry, just out of gratitude. And I thought about the guys in that treatment center with me. And I thought about my roommate who I had known and who was so bright and so nice and such a caring guy and a good guy and everything. But he'd never buy it. He told me one day in treatment, he said, "I'm concerned about you." He said, "They're brainwashing you." I said, "Oh, do you really think so?" I said, "You know, if anybody's brain need washing, it's mine." I said, "I want to be like these people. Do you really think it's happening to me?" And he said, "You're as crazy as they are." I said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." You know, a year later, I celebrate my first birthday, my first anniversary, and my sponsor was there and everything. And after the meeting was over, I came up and I was just amazed. My sponsor said, "Keith did everything wrong this year, but he didn't take a drink or a drug, and he went to about 500 meetings in this country and France and Rome and every place he went. He went to meetings in different languages and everything." So this guy comes up who had been my roommate, right? By this time he's got a patch on his eye because he's been in 3 more institutions. In the last institution, somebody gouged his eye out with an ice pick. He's got a patch on his eye, and he says to me, "Don't you think you're overdoing it with these meetings?" And you know how insecure I am. My first thought is, maybe he's right. And then I said, wait a minute. I said, one of us got one eye, one of us got two eyes. You know. And I was thinking about him, you know, and he died. He died a little later. And I was thinking about these two little kids who I wasn't permitted to see, and I was developing a relationship with, and we were coming to love one another. Learning how to be a parent from you. I'd call you up and ask you how to be a father. I never had a course. I assumed I was supposed to know. I thought I went with the big picture. And I was just amazed. And I was crying, and I said to God, I said, why me? Father, why have you picked me for this? And I remembered a call I had made to my ex-wife one time, and when I first got in that treatment center, I called her up and I said, honey, I'm in this place out here. And she said, so? And I said, I'm an alcoholic. She said, no shit. And I said, why me? And she said, why not you? If anybody deserves it, you do it. She hung up. And then I was thinking about that, and here I am, and I said to God, I said, why me, Father? Why have you picked me? And he said, why not you, son? If anybody deserves it, you do. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't it wonderful to be the child of a loving God? Isn't it great to be wrong about God? I had a big fingernail theory about God, that one day when I least expected, this big fingernail was going to rush through time and space and flick me off into the great unknown. And isn't it wonderful to be wrong about that? Like God may have a big fingernail, but he's got big arms. You know, sometimes I'm afraid, and you know, I'm almost 45 years old, but sometimes the equivalent to that thing under my bed will be there. And I'll say, will you hold me? And he said, yeah. And he holds me. And he's taught me to love my parents. And you know how he's taught me to love them? This is going to be revolutionary. He taught me to honor them. Isn't that crazy? That craziest thing you ever heard in your life? You know how I honor my parents? I don't correct them anymore. They've been around a long time. They don't need me to correct them. When they make mistakes, they don't need me to point it out. I honor them. I sit and listen to my mother tell those crazy stories. You know, when Keith was little, you know, all those things, you know. And I just sit and smile, and I honor her. And my father talks to me about baseball and about this and about his very definite opinions on politics and this and that. I don't argue with him. I sit there and I honor him. And I love him. God, I love him. And you know what? I said to him, Dad, I love you. He said, son, I love you too. Guess who kept him from telling me that he loved me? Me. What a schmuck I've been. You know, I missed so much until I met you. And with you I have everything. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Without you, there's nothing. There's nothing. I know, too, that you will always have a place in your heart for me. I know that. I don't question it anymore. You know what that is? It's faith. It's faith. Faith. It isn't because you've proven it to me. It's because you're who you are. You can't not love me. And I can't not love you. I don't treat you as well as I want to a lot of the times. But I can't not love you. God knows I do. Such a privilege to be with you. Thank you.